The shocking discovery of betrayal begins with subtle signs, the kind that you almost want to ignore because facing them feels heavier than carrying them silently. It starts with late-night phone calls that suddenly become guarded, a familiar smile that feels forced, and conversations that seem to dissolve into vague excuses. At first, I convinced myself it was nothing, that my own insecurities were weaving false threads into reality. But betrayal has a way of creeping through cracks, no matter how hard you try to seal them. I began noticing he was more protective of his phone, the screen always tilted away from my eyes. The man who once shared every detail of his day now offered me fragments, hollow words that filled the silence, but revealed nothing of substance. And in those silences, my instincts screamed louder than his excuses ever could. Curiosity soon gave way to unease, and unease to determination. I started to pay attention to the rhythm of his absences, the dinners that were suddenly postponed, the urgent office meetings that became routine. There was a pattern, a clockwork precision behind his disappearances that couldn't be dismissed as coincidence. I traced the pieces carefully, each clue another weight on my chest, but I knew I had to follow the trail. One evening, when he claimed he would be caught up late at work, I decided to test the boundaries of my suspicion. I dialed his office line, expecting perhaps a distracted answer. Instead, the voice on the other end casually told me he had left hours earlier. That was the moment the floor beneath me cracked, when denial could no longer shield me from the truth pressing against my ribs. I felt the sting of betrayal course through my body, but rather than breaking me, it sharpened me. I began to investigate quietly, not with accusations, but with patience. He left behind crumbs without even realizing it, a receipt tucked into a pocket, the faint scent of a perfume I never owned lingering on his clothes, a smile in his texts that wasn't meant for me. Every detail became a shard of glass in my hands, painful to hold but impossible to let go. And then, one evening, the final proof came uninvited. A message left open on his phone, carelessly exposed in the rush of his deceit, revealed the words that confirmed what I had feared. Dinner. Same place as last time. Can't wait. 3 sentences that cut deeper than any blade. I didn't cry when I read it. The tears had already been spent on doubts and sleepless nights. Instead, I felt a strange calmness settle over me, a clarity that transformed heartbreak into resolve. My world had shifted, but rather than collapsing, it was aligning into something stronger. Betrayal had handed me its script, and I was about to rewrite the ending in my own hand. I knew where they were meeting, I knew when, and I knew I would not approach this storm with tears, but with fire. The shocking discovery wasn't just that my husband was unfaithful. The deeper shock was realizing how easily he believed he could hide it, how little he thought of the woman who had built a life with him. That sting of underestimation became my fuel. In that moment, I decided I would not remain the silent wife, the shadow in the corner of his lies. I would face this betrayal head-on, not with begging or screaming, but with the kind of precision that would leave a mark far deeper than his deception. And so, the plan began to take shape inside me, each thought sharper, each detail clearer, every step closer to the inevitable confrontation that would shift the balance of power forever. Planning the perfect confrontation wasn't something I rushed into, because revenge, to be effective, requires patience, timing, and a clear mind. In the wake of betrayal, emotions run wild, anger pushes you to act immediately, heartbreak tempts you to crumble, but I chose a different path. I knew that if I confronted him recklessly, he would twist the truth, gaslight me, and bury me beneath excuses. What I wanted was not just to expose his betrayal, but to take control of the moment in a way that left no room for denial, no escape from the truth. I wanted to craft a scenario where his lies collapsed under the weight of their own exposure, where silence became his only answer. That kind of confrontation could not be born in haste. It had to be constructed carefully, piece by piece, like a game of chess where each move determined the final blow. I began with observation. If he thought his secret dinners were invisible to me, then he underestimated my ability to follow the shadows he left behind. I tracked his patterns, the times he claimed to be busy at work, the restaurants he conveniently avoided mentioning, the sudden care with which he groomed himself before these so-called late nights. It wasn't hard to confirm where he was going. Betrayal always leaves a trail, and his arrogance made him careless. Once I had the name of the restaurant and the date of his next meeting with her, my plan began to form. But I didn't want to walk in alone. That would make me look like a wounded wife confronting her cheating husband. No, I needed this to cut deeper, to become unforgettable. That's when the thought struck me. She too had someone she was betraying. Her husband deserved to know the truth, and together, we could create a confrontation that neither of them would ever forget. The first step was reaching out to him. It wasn't easy. I debated whether he would believe me or accuse me of stirring trouble. But when betrayal ties two strangers together, there is an unspoken understanding, a shared wound that makes trust possible. I contacted him, laid out the truth with evidence, and watched as disbelief turned into rage, then into a cold silence that mirrored my own. He didn't argue, didn't deny. He simply asked me what I wanted to do about it. That was the moment the plan stopped being mine alone and became ours. Two betrayed souls, bound by pain, now united by a desire for justice. We decided that confronting them directly in the restaurant would deliver the impact we needed. Not in private, where they could twist the narrative, but in public, under the dim light of candles and the watchful eyes of strangers. Betrayal loves the shadows, but it recoils when dragged into the open. We wanted them to feel the weight of their lies under the gaze of the very world they thought they could deceive. And so I called the restaurant, requested a reservation, and made sure it was at a table right beside theirs. The symbolism was too perfect. While they tried to dine in secrecy, we would be seated within arm's reach, watching, unmasking them with nothing but our presence. Every detail mattered. What I would wear, how I would walk in, the expression I would hold on my face, it all had to be precise. I didn't want to look broken or defeated. I wanted to radiate composure, the kind of calm that unsettles more than fury ever could. My goal was not to scream or cause a scene. My goal was to let the silence speak louder than any words, to let the shock in their eyes become the confession they could never deny. I rehearsed the moment in my head countless times, not to script my words, but to steady my heart. I reminded myself that I wasn't just confronting him for myself, but for the years I gave him, for the trust he betrayed, for the love he shattered. This confrontation was not only about exposing the affair, it was about reclaiming my power. As the day approached, the anticipation was like fire under my skin. Each hour closer to the dinner felt like another beat of a war drum inside my chest. I wasn't nervous anymore. I wasn't scared of what I might see. I was ready, not just to catch him, but to watch the mask of deceit fall away in real time. The plan was simple but devastating: to show up, to sit down, to make my presence undeniable, and to let the truth do the rest. Every detail had been set, every move carefully considered, and as the moment drew near, I felt the strange calmness of someone who knew the game was already won before it even began. Reserving the table next to their affair was more than just a tactical choice. It was the very heart of the plan, the move that would transform suspicion into undeniable truth. The thought alone carried a strange mix of satisfaction and dread, because it wasn't just about seeing them together, it was about placing myself in their world at the exact moment they thought they were most hidden. The restaurant was carefully chosen by them, a place that offered soft lighting, discreet corners, and the illusion of privacy. But that illusion would shatter the second I stepped through its doors. By securing the table beside theirs, I wasn't just setting the stage for confrontation, I was ensuring that every word, every glance, every touch would be witnessed not by strangers, but by the two people they least expected. When I called the restaurant to make the reservation, I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears. I had already confirmed their booking. His mistress had been careless enough to leave messages that included time and place. I told the host I needed a table for two, close to the one already reserved in his name. The host didn't question it. Why would they? To them, it was just another request. To me, it was everything. The moment the reservation was confirmed, I felt a rush of power course through me. For weeks, I had been the one in the shadows, silently piecing together the truth, but now the roles were about to shift. They thought they were meeting in secret, yet I would be closer than their lies could protect them. The night of the dinner approached with an intensity one could feel in my bones. I rehearsed the moment of arrival in my mind, walking into the restaurant with her husband at my side, our presence a silent storm that would unravel their carefully crafted deceit. I could almost picture their faces, the shock freezing them in place, the disbelief flashing across their eyes. That image alone was enough to keep me steady as the day turned into night. This wasn't just about catching them, it was about reclaiming the narrative they thought they controlled. Reserving that table wasn't simply logistics, it was symbolic. It was about proximity, about inserting myself into the very space they had tried to carve out for their betrayal. Sitting just a breath away from them would transform the act of cheating from whispers in the dark into a spectacle illuminated by the reality of exposure. They wouldn't be able to deny their relationship, because there we would be, two betrayed partners watching them like mirrors reflecting back their own sins. And, unlike accusations made in the privacy of home, this moment would be undeniable, witnessed by the quiet murmur of strangers dining around us, strangers who would unknowingly become silent judges of the scene unfolding before them. The preparation leading up to that night became meticulous. I thought about what to wear, not as a costume of vengeance, but as armor. I wanted to look strong, poised, unbroken. I wanted my presence to contradict every assumption he might have made about me falling apart in the face of betrayal. This wasn't about rage or spectacle, it was about composure, about sitting at that table with dignity so powerful it would haunt him long after the night ended. I imagined sitting down, ordering calmly, my eyes catching theirs not with desperation, but with the steady fire of someone who knew exactly what had been done to her. The act of reserving the table next to theirs also carried a deeper psychological blow. Affairs thrive in secrecy, in the thrill of being unseen, in the comfort of believing the world cannot touch them. By placing myself physically beside them, I was collapsing the distance between their secret world and my reality. I was telling them without words that there was no safe corner, no private sanctuary where betrayal could remain hidden. Every laugh they shared, every touch of the hand, every whisper across that table would carry the weight of being witnessed. As the hour of the dinner drew near, I could almost taste the atmosphere I was about to walk into. The clinking of glasses, the quiet hum of conversations, the flickering candles, all ordinary to the other diners, yet for us, it would be the stage of reckoning. My table, reserved so deliberately, would stand as a quiet declaration of strength. I wouldn't need to shout or accuse. I wouldn't need to fling evidence across the table. My very presence beside them would be enough. And in that presence, they would see their lies unravel, not because I exposed them with words, but because the truth would already be sitting in the seat right next to them. Walking in with her husband at my side was the moment the plan shifted from an idea into reality, the point where all the carefully crafted details transformed into action. The restaurant doors opened slowly, and in that instant, the air felt different, charged with a tension that only I could feel rushing through my veins. I had replayed this entrance in my mind countless times, but living it was something else entirely. My heart pounded, not from fear, but from anticipation, the kind of anticipation that comes when you know justice is about to step into the room with you. I glanced at him, the man she had betrayed just as I had been betrayed, and in his eyes I saw the same storm brewing. We weren't walking in as strangers anymore. Betrayal had tied us together, made us allies in a moment that would leave a mark on all four of us forever. The restaurant was warm, the lights dim, the murmur of soft conversations filling the space, but for me, it felt like silence. Every step toward that table was deliberate, steady, controlled. I refused to let my nerves betray me. If my husband had believed that I would crumble, he would see instead the strength I had built out of the very ashes of his lies. I walked with composure, my posture tall, my face calm, every detail of my presence designed to send a message. I wasn't there as a broken wife. I was there as a woman reclaiming her power. And beside me was the man who had been cast aside by her betrayal, walking with the same quiet strength, our unity making the moment even sharper. We spotted them almost instantly. They were seated in a corner booth, the kind chosen for intimacy, their faces close, their laughter soft and private. They didn't notice us at first, so consumed in the comfort of their secret world. For a fleeting second, I watched them, almost as if I were outside myself, seeing the betrayal play out in real time. The way his hand reached for hers across the table, the way she tilted her head as if the world belonged to them. It would have been romantic if it hadn't been built on lies, but that illusion was about to be torn apart. When we reached our reserved table, directly beside theirs, their heads lifted. First his eyes caught mine, and in that split second, I saw everything. Shock froze him, his smile faltering, his entire body stiffening as if the air had been sucked from his lungs. He hadn't prepared for this, hadn't even imagined this possibility. For weeks, he had walked so confidently in his lies, believing they would remain hidden forever, but now the truth sat less than a breath away from him. Her reaction came next, her eyes widened, her lips parting as if words might form, but none came. The color drained from her face as she glanced between me and the man beside me, realization hitting her harder than any accusation ever could. We didn't say anything at first. Silence was our weapon, and it was far louder than any outburst. We sat down with quiet composure, ordering as if it were any ordinary dinner, yet the weight of our presence made every movement at their table tremble. I could feel their discomfort growing by the second, the tension in the air so thick it clung to every glance, every breath. My husband tried to compose himself, straightening in his seat, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. But the damage was done. He had been caught, not just by me, but by the very person his mistress had vowed to love. Walking in with her husband at my side wasn't just a confrontation, it was a mirror held up to their betrayal. They were no longer hidden lovers, they were exposed liars sitting inches away from the lives they had tried to destroy. I didn't need to raise my voice or make a scene. My calm presence, our united front, was enough to unravel their facade. Every stolen glance between them now carried the weight of exposure, every attempt to act natural crumbled under the knowledge that their secret had been shattered. For me, the power of that moment wasn't in their shock, it was in the strength I felt within myself. I had walked into the lion's den, not as prey, but as the one holding the torch. And with her husband beside me, the betrayal they thought would bind them in secrecy instead bound us, their victims, into a force they could not silence. The restaurant buzzed on around us, oblivious to the storm unfolding at those two tables, but for the four of us, the world had shifted forever. Walking in with her husband at my side was the line they never expected us to cross, the undeniable proof that no secret stays hidden when truth decides to take its seat at the table. The unforgettable moment of exposure came the second their carefully crafted illusion collided with reality, and it was more powerful than any confrontation I could have scripted with words. There we sat, inches away from them, the four of us sharing the same air but separated by an invisible wall of betrayal. The restaurant around us seemed oblivious, glasses clinking, waiters moving gracefully between tables, laughter floating softly through the air. But for us, time had slowed. Every detail became heightened, the way my husband's hand froze halfway to his glass, the sharp intake of breath from his mistress when her eyes locked onto the man seated beside me, the way their smiles died mid-curve. It was in those small, unspoken reactions that the truth revealed itself more clearly than any accusation could. I didn't rush to speak, nor did her husband. Words weren't necessary in those first few moments. Our silence was deliberate, a silence heavy enough to press against their chests, suffocating in its stillness. Betrayal thrives in secrecy, but in the open it shrinks, unable to withstand the weight of being seen. They shifted in their seats, their bodies betraying them even as their mouths remained closed. My husband's eyes darted from me to the man beside me, as if searching for a way to explain the unexplainable. Her face turned pale, her fingers trembling slightly as she pulled her hand back from where it had been resting on the table. That small motion, that quiet withdrawal, was as damning as any confession. It was her husband who broke the silence first, his voice steady, low, and sharp enough to cut through the thick air. He didn't shout, didn't accuse. He simply addressed her by name, the sound of it carrying all the weight of his disappointment and disbelief. She flinched as though the very syllables had struck her. My husband shifted uncomfortably, but I held his gaze, unwavering, letting him see that I wasn't broken, that I wasn't afraid. The more they squirmed under our steady presence, the more their affair unraveled without us needing to force it. Exposure wasn't about raising a scene. It was about making them face themselves in a way they could no longer avoid. The moment stretched on, each second a reminder of how far their lies had carried them and how quickly it all came crashing down. They whispered to each other, fumbling for excuses, but their words tangled into incoherence. Every attempt to mask the truth only deepened their guilt. Their eyes flickered nervously toward us, searching for mercy, but finding none. We didn't need to shout to make them feel small. Our quiet control, our very existence at that table, had already undone them. I noticed the way the waitstaff moved uneasily around us, sensing tension without understanding its depth. To them, it must have looked like two couples dining quietly, yet the undercurrent of truth was so palpable it filled every corner of that dimly lit room. And perhaps that was part of the unforgettable nature of the moment, how ordinary the setting was, how calm the surface appeared, while beneath it, an entire world was collapsing for them. Affairs often imagine themselves as untouchable, but when exposed, they become fragile, crumbling under the simplest acts of being seen. I held my composure, sipping from my glass slowly, as if I had all the time in the world. Inside me, a storm raged, but I refused to let it spill onto the table. That control was my power, and I could see it unraveling them with every second that passed. My husband couldn't meet my eyes for long. Every time he tried, he faltered, looking down at his plate, fiddling with his napkin, desperate for an escape. She leaned closer to him as though seeking shelter, but even in that closeness, there was fear, not love. They had built their affair on the illusion of passion and secrecy, but now, stripped of the shadows, it was nothing but fear and shame. Her husband leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable, but the steel in his silence was louder than any outburst could have been. I could see her trembling, struggling to form words that would bridge the chasm between them, but no words existed strong enough to mend the destruction. My husband attempted to speak at one point, his voice faltering as he muttered something about misunderstanding, but the look I gave him silenced him instantly. Exposure had already spoken for us. The unforgettable moment wasn't just about catching them, it was about watching the truth consume them from within. Watching their laughter die, their confidence vanish, their secret unravel in the open was a kind of justice no words could replicate. And as I sat there, calm and steady, I realized the power wasn't in the confrontation itself, but in the fact that they could no longer hide. That raw, undeniable exposure was the justice I had been waiting for, the kind that left scars deeper than anger ever could. Turning humiliation into empowerment was the part of the journey I hadn't fully grasped until I was living it. Betrayal has a way of making you feel small at first, like the ground has been ripped away from under your feet, leaving you stumbling in the dark. But sitting there in that restaurant, looking at their crumbling facade, I realized humiliation doesn't have to be the end of the story. It can be the beginning of something far stronger. The sting of their deceit was sharp, But in that sting I discovered a new kind of strength, the kind that grows when you refuse to let someone else define your worth. The moment of exposure had done its job. They were stripped of their illusions, left grasping at fragments of lies that no longer held any weight. For them, humiliation was inevitable. But for me, it was a choice. I could either let their betrayal humiliate me, turning me into a victim forever haunted by their actions, or I could take that moment and transform it into the fuel that would propel me forward. I chose the latter. I chose empowerment. I realized that I wasn't the one who had to carry shame, it was them. Every whisper, every sideways glance in that restaurant, every ounce of judgment from the people who had unknowingly become witnesses wasn't directed at me. It was directed at them, at the two who thought their lies were untraceable. Sitting there, calm and poised, I understood that power doesn't always come from grand gestures or fiery speeches. Sometimes power comes from restraint, from knowing when to speak and when to let silence deliver the heavier blow. I didn't need to humiliate myself by begging for answers or demanding apologies. I didn't need to crumble in front of them because my strength was in my presence, in the way I held myself with dignity while they faltered. That was empowerment, knowing I could stand in the very heart of my pain and not be destroyed by it. Her husband's composure mirrored my own, and in that unity, there was even more strength. Betrayal often isolates, but in this strange, twisted way, we had found solidarity. Together, we turned what could have been a spectacle of brokenness into a silent declaration of power. They expected tears, shouting, chaos, but what they got instead was control, an unshakable calm that only made their humiliation deeper. The very fact that we walked in together, sat down together, and held our ground without losing composure turned the tables in our favor. They had tried to rob us of dignity, yet we were the ones who left with it intact. The empowerment didn't come only from facing them, it came from what I realized about myself in that moment. All the doubts I had carried, all the nights I had questioned my worth, all the times I wondered if I wasn't enough, they dissolved as I watched them shrink under the weight of exposure. Their betrayal wasn't a reflection of my inadequacy. It was a reflection of their weakness, their inability to honor what they had, their failure to be loyal. Understanding that truth lifted a weight from me I hadn't even realized I was carrying. My worth was never diminished by their choices, it was illuminated by the way I chose to rise above them. Turning humiliation into empowerment also meant reclaiming my narrative. Betrayal had tried to write me as the wounded wife, the deceived partner left in the shadows. But that wasn't my story anymore. My story was one of resilience, of walking into the very place they thought I couldn't reach, and showing them that I was stronger than their lies. I had taken the humiliation they tried to cast on me and turned it into a stage where my strength shone brighter than their deceit. That shift in perspective changed everything. As I sat there, sipping calmly, I realized I didn't need closure from them. I didn't need explanations or apologies. What I needed, I already had, the power to stand tall, to face the truth without breaking, to walk out of that restaurant with my head held high. Humiliation wasn't mine to carry, it was theirs. Empowerment was mine to claim, and in that moment, I claimed it fully. Every glance they avoided, every excuse they couldn't muster, every ounce of discomfort etched into their faces was proof that the balance of power had shifted. They were no longer in control of the story. I was. And that realization was the ultimate transformation, the point where betrayal stopped being my downfall and became the foundation of my strength.